Pursuant to notice for purposes of markup, I call up H.Res. 147, calling for the release of United States citizen Saeed Abedini and condemning the government of Iran for its persecution of religious minorities. The clerk will read.
H.Res. 147, calling for the release of United States citizen Saeed Abedini and condemning the government of Iran.
Without objection, the measure is considered read and open for amendment at any point. I thank the author of this bill, Bill Cassidy, for bringing forth this important legislation this afternoon. Despite Rouhani's rhetoric and his charm offensive, every indication is that he continues in his predecessor's footsteps and has not halted or even curbed the regime's systematic and widespread human rights violations. Since he took office, the Iranian regime has conducted over 200 executions, with nearly 20 being conducted in public, and has renewed its repression of the media and civil society. Religious minorities have also gotten no reprieve from the regime. Last month, 4 Iranian Christians were sentenced to 80 lashes for drinking sacramental wine during communion. And this past summer, an Iranian Christian convert was sentenced to 10 years in prison for distributing Bibles. This past August, an American citizen, Pastor Saeed Abedini, was convicted and given an 8-year sentence for what the regime said was undermining the government. In reality, he was arrested and convicted for preaching his Christian faith. Earlier this month, Iranian authorities transferred Pastor Saeed to a notorious prison that is reserved for Iran's most violent criminals and where his life is in danger on a daily basis. These are not isolated incidents, and it is time for the Iranian regime to end its persecution of religious minorities and immediately release Saeed and others like him. By passing H.Res. 147, we will send a strong message to Pastor Saeed, his family, and to the Iranian people who wish to practice their faiths openly and freely. And we stand with them during this time of despair, and we will continue to press for respect of human rights in Iran. Let's bring Pastor Saeed home so that he can reunite with his wife and 2 children where he belongs. I would now like to recognize any member from the Democratic side to speak for Mr. Deutsch in support of the resolution, if they wish. Fearless Leader Cicilline.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to also compliment Mr. Cassidy and say what an important piece of legislation this is and how important it is that we send a very strong message on this issue, and thank the Chair for convening the hearing and calling for the markup.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to recognize any members who seek recognition on the Republican side if they wish to speak. Mr. Cotton of Arkansas is recognized.
I'm proud to sponsor this resolution as well, calling for the release of Pastor Saeed Abedini, who's been arrested and imprisoned since last year. Pastor Abedini traveled to Iran many times over the last 4 years to open an orphanage and preach his Christian faith, all with the approval of the Iranian regime. Since he's been arrested, he's been subject to brutal beatings for nothing more than that ministering, and now he's been transferred to Karaj, a notorious prison where murder is an all too common occurrence. I hope that our administration strongly urges the Iranian regime to release Pastor Abedini so he can be reunited with his family. Unfortunately, though, his case is not isolated. The Iranian regime is a totalitarian theocracy that persecutes Christians and people of other faith as well. This is not something that they do just as an accident of the nature of the regime. This is in the very heart of their regime, to suppress religious freedom of all people in violation of numerous international obligations and treaties. So we have to ensure that Pastor Abedini is released, but also continue to pressure Iran to respect the natural rights of every one of its citizens. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. And any other members wish to seek recognition? If not, we will like to turn to the sponsor, the author of this important resolution, so he could be heard. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you for having me here today to discuss this resolution, and I appreciate the work that the committee has done on this. Mr. Abedini is an American who, while he lived in Iran, converted from Islam to Christianity. He was arrested in July 2012 when he was visiting family and working in a non-sectarian orphanage. The Revolutionary Guard arrested him on charges of activities disruptive to the state. However, when he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, it was due to missionary activities which took place a decade earlier when such activities were illegal in Iran. During his imprisonment, Mr. Abedini reportedly has suffered constant pain, internal bleeding, and has not received sufficient medical care. On more than one occasion, he was taken to the hospital where the physician recommended he be admitted and the government would not allow. On another occasion, a nurse refused to touch him because he is a Christian. As a physician, I find that particularly offensive. To further underline the immediacy of the situation, just last week, Mr. Abedini was transferred to the notorious prison, Rajig Shahar, a prison facility where political prisoners simply disappear and are killed by other prisoners. He has reportedly been placed in a ward that houses murderers, is in a cell with other death row inmates, and is not allowed visitors. When Mr. Abedini's father went to visit, he was denied entry, and the blankets and medications he brought to treat his son's internal bleeding were taken away. His wife, Nogme, has said that she is more concerned now about his safety than at any other time during his imprisonment. This is an American being held hostage by the government of Iran. I ask that you pass this resolution out of committee so that we can increase pressure on Iran to release Mr. Abedini from his wrongful imprisonment and allow him to return back to the United States where he is a citizen and to be reunited with his wife and his young children. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no further requests for time and no amendments being offered, the Chair now moves that the committee agree to H.Res. 147. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the measure is agreed to. Without objection, House Res. 147 is ordered favorably reported to the full committee, and the staff is directed to make any technical and conforming changes. Thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for this bill. And now we will just take a pause.